How did a man who never found his city of pure gold manage to forever etch his name in history in golden letters? And how did the most dazzling favorite of the Queen of England, her personal privateer and poet, end his days on the scaffold, beheaded by order of her successor? This story isn't about the treasures of El Dorado. It's about a man who was his own greatest project and most grandiose adventure. His name was Walter Raleigh. When he first appeared at court, he had nothing but holes in his doublet, a sharp mind, and boundless ambition in his eyes. He was a nobody, a provincial nobleman from Devon, one of many who came to London seeking their fortune. But Raleigh was different. He saw the royal court not as a place of noble service, but as a theater for a brutal game of survival. And he intended to be its chief orchestrator. Legend has it that he threw his only expensive cloak into a puddle, so Queen Elizabeth I wouldn't soil her shoes, a beautiful tale that perfectly describes his method. The truth is, Raleigh understood the crucial point. The aging queen, surrounded by gray-haired advisors and dull aristocrats, desperately craved a spectacle. She needed a knight from ancient ballads, daring, desperate, young, and willing to do anything for her smile. And Raleigh gave her that performance. He transformed his life into a show for an audience of one. He wrote her poems, calling her the eternal goddess Diana. He fought duels, defending her honor at the slightest provocation. He invested all his money in privateering raids against the Spanish, bringing her not only the gold from enemy galleons, but also the glory of a mistress of the seas. Every one of his gestures was calculated. He wasn't simply courting a woman, he was investing in absolute power. And the queen, who could see through people, delightedly allowed herself to be deceived. She enjoyed the game, and Raleigh was her best partner in it. In just a few years, this upstart from obscurity gained everything old aristocratic families could only dream of: a knighthood, vast estates in England and Ireland, and monopolies on the wine and tin trades. He became captain of her personal guard. He also became one of the wealthiest and most reviled men in the country. Walter Raleigh conquered the capital not with a sword, but with perfectly calculated compliments and boundless audacity. He proved that to conquer an empire, sometimes all it takes is laying down a cloak at the right moment. But this audacity wasn't born in London palaces. It was forged in the damp air of Devon, permeated with salt and tar. His childhood wasn't filled with balls and fencing lessons, but with stern sermons and fear. His father, also named Walter, was a Protestant to the core, a man of unyielding principles. When the Catholic Queen Mary Tudor, known as Bloody Mary, ascended the throne, dark times descended upon the Raleigh family. Their Protestant neighbors were burned at the stake, and their faith was declared heresy. Young Raleigh witnessed his father, a proud and strong man, forced to hide in coastal caves to escape arrest and execution. He saw how unwavering principles could transform a parent from a master of his own destiny into a hunted beast. This humiliation stayed with him forever. It was the kind of formative injustice that either breaks a child or forges steel. In Walter Raleigh's case, it was the latter. It was then that young Walter learned the most crucial lesson of his life. Principles are a luxury only winners can afford. Faith is a weakness if it impedes survival. The world is not a place for the righteous. It's an arena where the cleverest, most adaptable, and most ruthless survive. While his father prayed to God, Walter decided he would bargain with the devil if it granted him power that would guarantee no one would ever have to hide again. He would not repeat his father's mistakes. His only religion would be success, and his only prayer, ambition. The England he burst into was a nation on the brink of crisis, a Protestant island in an ocean of Catholic enemies, with Spain, the world's hegemon, breathing down its neck. The queen was aging, leaving no heir, and every courtier secretly placed bets on who would succeed her and whose heads would be the first to roll. The old aristocracy clung to the past, but the future did not belong to them. It belonged to daring adventurers for whom no laws existed, neither divine nor human. This was a time when pirate and patriot were synonymous, when plunder in the name of the crown became an act of valor. Spanish gold, flowing like a river from the New World, was poisoning Europe, financing wars against England. Elizabeth found a brilliant asymmetric response. She unofficially sanctioned her sea dogs, Drake, Hawkins, Frobisher, and soon Raleigh would join them, to bite off as much of the Spanish pie as they could carry. Each captured galleon was not merely plunder, but a blow to the enemy, an act of national resistance. In this murky world without clear rules, morality became as flexible as a ship's rope. A man could be a poet writing tender sonnets and at the same time a ruthless raider who ordered no quarter. He could be an alchemist scientist and simultaneously a spy weaving conspiracies in dark taverns. Society didn't just accept this, it demanded such individuals, people capable of wearing many masks, playing any role, and delivering a backstab with a smile. This was fertile ground, an ideal hotbed for Walter Raleigh's talents. He didn't just live in his time, he embodied it. And so he began to act. His first move was to set his sights not on a Spanish ship, but on an entire continent. He decided to establish the first English colony in the New World, his own outpost, his personal empire across the ocean. This was unheard of audacity. England was not yet a naval power, and only a madman would dare challenge almighty Spain. Raleigh found investors, outfitted ships, and sent hundreds of settlers to Roanoke Island. He named the new land Virginia, in honor of the Virgin Queen. A flawless compliment, paid for with other people's lives. But instead of triumph, there was silence. When the next ship arrived at the colony, it found only empty houses and an ominous inscription carved into a tree, Croatoan. Tower. All the colonists, including the first English child born in America, had vanished without a trace. For anyone else, this would have been the end, catastrophe, bankruptcy, disgrace. But for Raleigh, the colossal failure was a mere pretext to launch an even more fantastical project. Since a real empire hadn't materialized, he decided to sell England a myth. He declared he knew the location of El Dorado, the legendary golden city of the Incas. He personally led an expedition into the wild jungles of South America, navigating hundreds of miles up the Orinoco, battling disease, hunger, and despair. He found not a single gram of gold. Yet he returned to London with a far more valuable treasure, a story. Raleigh wrote a best-selling book, vividly describing streets paved with gold and palaces built of pure silver. His inspiring lies convinced everyone, from London's paupers to royal advisors. Raleigh understood what the world would only realize centuries later: trade in dreams, not goods. The dream of El Dorado was worth far more than any actual gold, and herein lay his greatest talent, his true magic. Raleigh possessed what today would be called hypnotic charisma. He didn't just tell, he showed. He himself was the best advertisement for his ideas. Tall, stately, with a piercing gaze and a voice that could convince a stone to move. When he spoke of gold, people literally felt its weight in their hands. He didn't promise, he guaranteed. His arsenal contained not merely words, but a refined set of manipulation tools. His first tool was playing on greed. He understood that to make a person risk everything, you must promise them the impossible. But he made this impossible tangible. He brought back not just tall tales from his journeys, but proof. Strange plants, exotic animals, and most importantly, specks of real gold, allegedly found at the foot of Golden Mountains. He unfurled maps before investors on which he had drawn non-existent cities and rivers. He sold not hope, but an almost accomplished fact. His second tool was selecting the right team. Raleigh never tried to convince skeptics. That was a waste of time. He sought out people with empty pockets and hungry eyes. Ruined noblemen, younger sons without inheritance, soldiers left without a war. These were people who desperately needed something to believe in because reality offered them nothing. He didn't recruit a team, he gathered a congregation. And for these people, he was not an adventurer, but a prophet leading them to the promised land. And finally, his main technique was creating an information bubble. He spread rumors in port taverns, bribed cartographers to add his fictitious cities to maps, and published pamphlets and books. He created such a buzz around his projects that doubting them became a sign of poor taste, a lack of patriotism, and even imagination. Raleigh didn't just deceive, he constructed reality. He built his golden city first in people's minds, and that was more enduring than any stone. But such a grand deception couldn't be pulled off alone. Titans of the Elizabethan era stood behind him. Chief among them was Sir Francis Walsingham, head of the Secret Service, a man whose spy network enveloped all of Europe. Walsingham saw Raleigh not merely as an adventurer, but as an ideal weapon against Spain. Every one of Raleigh's expeditions, even failed ones, was a thorn in the side of the Spanish Empire, diverting its fleet and resources, and London merchants and bankers saw in him a walking investment with enormous returns. They gave him money, he gave them a dream, and as long as the dream worked, everyone profited. They were his shareholders, and he was the CEO of their shared fantasy. But where there is light, there is always shadow, and Raleigh's shadow was Robert Cecil, son of the Queen's chief adviser. Small, hunchbacked, with the cold, calculating mind of an accountant, Cecil was the complete opposite of the brilliant and imposing Raleigh. He didn't believe in fairy tales, he believed in numbers, reports, and facts. And the facts told him that Walter Raleigh was a fraud. Cecil despised him. He saw him not as a genius, but as a dangerous populist, an actor whose fables of El Dorado distracted the crown from real affairs and dragged the country into senseless adventures, burning money and lives. This was a quiet war, fought not on battlefields but in power's corridors, through secret reports and poisonous whispers in the Queen's ear. Cecil meticulously compiled a dossier on Raleigh's every failure, every shilling spent, every lie. He sought to unmask him, to show everyone the emperor had no clothes. Raleigh responded in the only way he knew. He staged an even grander show. He launched new projects, wrote new books, brought new proof, dazzling the court so no one noticed the cracks in his golden facade. His entire career was a desperate tightrope walk. On one side, powerful patrons needing his magic, on the other, a deadly enemy waiting for him to stumble. Below, observing, sat the Queen, and only her mood determined if a safety net would be stretched, and he stumbled. But he tripped not over Cecil's conspiracy nor a Spanish saber. He stumbled over the one thing he couldn't calculate: a woman. Her name was Elizabeth Throckmorton, one of the Queen's ladies-in-waiting. Young, beautiful, and most dangerously, she ended up in his bed. For a man who had transformed his life into a spectacle for Elizabeth, this was suicide. He broke the cardinal rule of the game. A goddess could have no rivals. Their secret romance became a ticking time bomb. Elizabeth became pregnant. Raleigh, a master of complex schemes, panicked. He made a second, even more fatal error. They secretly married. He hoped to conceal both the marriage and the child. But hiding anything from the spies who swarmed the court was impossible, and the news reached the Queen. For Elizabeth, this was not merely the betrayal of a favorite, it was rebellion, a direct insult to her power and to the very myth Raleigh had created for her. The Queen's fury was cold and absolute. The comedy was over. The curtain fell. Overnight, Sir Walter Raleigh, captain of the guard and the Queen's favorite, became a prisoner in the Tower. His wife and newborn son were also imprisoned there. All his titles, monopolies, and estates were confiscated. In an instant, the empire built on flattery and charm crumbled to dust. Robert Cecil could celebrate his victory. He didn't even have to strike the blow. His enemy had plunged the dagger into his own heart. Everything Cecil had gathered for years, reports of failed expeditions, rumors of embezzlement, evidence of deception, suddenly became irrelevant. Raleigh had destroyed himself. The man who built a career on illusions was undone by the most irrefutable reality: the birth of his own child. Beyond the Tower walls, another, no less brutal process began. The financial pyramid built on promises of a golden city collapsed, burying entire fortunes. Investors who, just yesterday, considered themselves future millionaires were left with nothing. Their shares in El Dorado turned into worthless paper. The gold Raleigh had brought as proof was re-examined and found to be either low-grade or outright counterfeit. All his artifacts and maps were declared props for a grand spectacle that had abruptly ended. But the consequences of this collapse extended far beyond the pockets of deceived investors. Raleigh's failure became a national trauma and a cold shower for England. The entire country realized the era of brilliant individuals who could conquer new worlds with charisma and audacity alone was over. The state could no longer afford to stake the nation's future on the fantasies of a single adventurer, however brilliant. Raleigh's disaster directly led to the birth of a new, far more pragmatic and ruthless model of colonization. Faceless joint stock companies replaced individual visionaries. Just a few years later, the Virginia Company would be founded, the first corporation of its kind to approach colonization not as an adventure, but as a business plan. With clear goals, a board of directors, and profit and loss statements. No more searching for golden cities, only calculation. how much it cost to send settlers, how much could be earned from tobacco, timber, and furs. No special laws against Raleigh's fraud were enacted. There was no need. The market and common sense delivered their verdict. Unwittingly, he taught England the most expensive and crucial lesson in its history. Empires are built not on the inspired lies of one man, but on cold calculation and the systematic work of thousands. His failure became the foundation for true success. He sought a fictitious city of gold, but instead unwittingly showed how to build the real British Empire. Years later, he was finally released from the Tower. The new king, James I, gave him one last chance, one final expedition for the gold of El Dorado. And this last adventure, like all the preceding ones, ended in complete collapse and led him directly to the scaffold. Dying, he asked the executioner to show his severed head to the crowd and uttered his last words. Here is a head that has too many conceits. And here begins the main paradox. He founded no successful colonies. He found not an ounce of El Dorado gold. He died in poverty and disgrace, executed as a state criminal. His sworn enemy, Robert Cecil, on the contrary, achieved everything. He died a natural death, showered with honors, having built an efficient and stable state machine. Cecil won. Raleigh lost on all counts. But which of them does history remember? The names of pragmatists and accountants have faded, like ledger entries on parchment. Yet the name of Walter Raleigh, adventurer, poet, and genius liar, still shines brightly, because he traded not in facts, but in possibility. He sold not reality, but the horizon. He was the living embodiment of the belief that one person, armed only with audacity and imagination, could redraw the map of the world. And this is his main, immortal lesson. Empires built on calculation eventually crumble, becoming mere lines in history textbooks. But myths created by geniuses live forever, because people will always need not only bread, but also the unattainable dream of a city of pure gold.